Today, I want to talk about GMAT verbal. This is a section that gives a lot of people a lot of trouble every single year. There's a brand new version of the GMAT verbal section because of the brand new edition of the GMAT that's just come out called GMAT Focus. And so here's what you need to know in 2024 and beyond. Number one, what is the verbal section? It's 23 questions in 45 minutes, which is slightly more time per question than we've seen in the past, which is a nice thing. The section used to be a lot longer, and the way that GMAC, the people who write the GMAT, have shortened the section is by completely eliminating a question type called sentence correction that used to test grammar. That's gone. And so for virtually all of us, the prep timeline has been significantly shortened because you don't have to learn or relearn any of the grammar content that folks in the past have had to, which is fantastic, by the way. So the section is designed to test your verbal reasoning skills, and that's a term that the GMAT defines in a very specific way, and I'm going to help you understand exactly what that means as we go. What's tested on the GMAT verbal section? There's two question types. The first is called critical reasoning. This tests logic. It's not a formal logic like you might have learned if you were a philosophy major in undergrad or like a rhetoric major or something like that. It's more of a type of logic where the GMAT makes its own rules, and I'm going to help you figure out exactly what to do about that in a moment. But just so that we don't get bogged down in the details, that's the first type of question you'll see on GMAT verbal is critical reasoning. The second type is called reading comprehension. And as expected, this tests your ability to comprehend a reading passage. It's very straightforward once you understand it, but it can be a little bit counterintuitive depending on your reading skills. Some people can use a very intuitive approach on reading comprehension and get phenomenal results. Other people need a major strategic shift, but it's definitely not rocket science. And I'm going to give you like a can't fail approach to reading comprehension in a little bit. But that's it. Those are the only two types of questions that you're going to see on GMAT verbal. It's roughly split about half each, but there can be a little bit of variance in how many reading comp you see versus how many critical reasoning you see, just depending on the day and what the algorithm decides to serve you. So how does the section work? It is adaptive. I just mentioned the algorithm, and there's a great deal of strategy involved in how to take a test like the GMAT because it's scored totally differently than tests you've taken in the past. For example, accuracy is not the only thing that determines your score on the GMAT. So let that blow your mind for a second if you're not familiar with that concept yet. If you want to understand how it's scored and how you can optimize your strategy, just check out the video on our website, thegmatstrategy.com. It's totally free. And in 40 minutes, I'll walk you through everything that you need to know about the GMAT scoring algorithm. And this is something that I was missing back in the day. It cost me many, many, many months of super hardcore pain and frustration, and I want to save you that. So that's there for you for free when you're ready. The punchline of how the GMAT scoring algorithm works for now is you can still miss some questions and get an amazing score. It's a situation where you don't need perfection, which I think is really, really great news. You definitely should do your absolute best, and you should prepare as hard as you possibly can because there is tremendous upside in this situation. And I imagine you wouldn't be here if you weren't already aware of that. But if you haven't done the actual writing down of what you want for yourself post MBA and done the research on the positive impact upside and the financial upside for you personally, that is a great exercise to get specific on the exact schools that you want to go to so you can have a really clear picture of what the payout is of this work that you may have to do. Some people are going to come into GMAT verbal and just be phenomenal at it from the beginning, or at least adequate, and they'll focus all their time on the other sections, and that's fine. That's part of being a good strategist. Some of you, verbal is going to be the bane of your existence, or it's already been the bane of your existence for quite some time. And I'm very happy you're here because I'm going to help you change the game. So the minimum score for a top school, let's call this top 10 program in the United States, really worldwide, is going to be around an 80 out of 90 possible points in the verbal section, give or take. 78 is probably doable at most schools, but 80 or better should be your goal from the beginning because we don't want to create friction in the application process. You don't want to give these schools any reason to say no to you. It can be a very competitive environment at the top schools. And let's be honest, you want to put your best foot forward pretty much no matter what. And if the only cost for that is some time up front and a little bit of sweat equity in the process, so to speak, then most of us would agree that's more than worth it. And you're going to be sweating it out with something in some kind of job. And so you might as well have the biggest possible upside that you possibly can for that effort. Now, after 80, it's more of a strategic decision for you personally about which score is going to be easiest for you to move in order to move the overall 3-digit score. So, just a quick aside here, I've touched on this in the past, but in case this is the first time that we're interacting, pretty much a 1 point gain on the quant, the verbal, or the data insights subscores is going to translate to about a 10 point gain on the overall score. Now, that's in the middle part of the bell curve. As you get to the higher or lower parts of the bell curve, it might take more subscore points, like 1.5 to 2 subscore points to move the overall 3-digit score 10 points. But when most people talk about their GMAT score, they're usually mentioning the 3-digit score, like I got a 655 or a 705 or something like that. And that's great. That is important for business school, but the individual subscores also matter. And so if you haven't set a verbal goal score yet, I recommend 80 if you want to go to a top school. If you're aiming outside the top 10 or top 20, then you can scale that goal down. I think a 76, 75 would be more than sufficient for anything in the top 50. And you could probably get away with a 70 plus if you're going outside the top 30 to 50 in terms of the rankings. So that should give you a good idea of what your goal score in verbal should be. And that can help you plot out how much time you should be investing in this based on your cold baseline test, which hopefully you've taken already. And if you haven't, that's definitely something you're going to want to get done as soon as possible, because it's very difficult to optimize your prep if you don't know what the starting point is. Just like it's hard to optimize a route on a road trip if you don't know where you're beginning. Okay. So if you need help figuring out what your personal goal should be or how to optimize your prep, just reach out to us anytime and we'll be happy to help. So, how do I manage my time in the verbal section? This is a big pain point for a lot of people. And if you listen to my GMAT Quant episode from last week, I introduced you to something called the 1-2-3 rule, and that still applies exactly the same way on GMAT Verbal. It's definitely worth listening to last week's episode about the quant section. You might even enjoy the original quant episode I put out about 5 years back, and that's in the audio feed. And just let me know if you have any questions about that. I'm not going to rehash the 1-2-3 rule right here because I went into extreme depth in both of those quant episodes. And if you need help figuring out your verbal timing, then that's what I recommend. So let's dive into the individual question types, because this is going to be one of the larger pain points for a lot of people once you address any timing issues you might have in the verbal section. Having said that, some of your timing issues might be related to your individual strategy for critical reasoning and your individual strategy for reading comp. So that's also part of the reason I'm not going deep on the 1-2-3 rule here, because there's only one type of question in the quant section, and that makes things pretty simple. But for critical reasoning and reading comp, the question types are different enough and the strategic approach is different enough that you're going to want to address your specific strategy for each individual question type first, and then deal with your overall section timing for most students. There are some exceptions to that. And if you have a personal coach, then definitely take that person's advice. And if you're already getting the results that you want, perhaps obviously keep doing what you're doing. I'm never going to argue with your results, but I assume you want your results to improve. And if you don't change your approach, it's very unlikely your results are going to change. All right. So let's talk about how to optimize your approach, starting with critical reasoning. So I already mentioned a critical reasoning test logic, but it's a logic where the GMAT makes its own rules. So like a general logic textbook is probably not going to be super helpful on critical reasoning. In fact, it might even be counterproductive. So you're going to want to get a GMAT specific source of learning on critical reasoning. There are great books out there that you can engage with. If you have a personal recommendation for a book, something that worked for someone who you know well, that's probably a good bet. It's pretty safe as far as the source of information goes. You might be taking a class, and pretty much any reputable course or tutor is going to be able to help you have a strong structured approach to critical reasoning. Now, if you're not getting results with your current approach or your current provider, it's definitely time to switch gears and shoot us a DM or head to our website and book a call with us, and we'll help you make a better choice for you personally. If you just need a couple tweaks or you're starting from scratch, then I'm going to help you build this up as best I can via audio. But the extreme depth that's required for a fantastic critical reasoning approach is really beyond the scope of this episode. So if you're interested, let us know, and we'll consider doing some question-specific episodes on each type of critical reasoning question. The way I like to break it down, I see there being 6 different types of critical reasoning question. I'll get into that in a moment, but other providers split it up differently. Some people say there's 9 different types, 10 different types, 4 different types. And the important thing is that you have an approach that's working for you, which is why I just said if you're getting great results, great. If you're not getting great results, then I'll help you out here. So I have a lot of recommendations about the type of prep materials that are going to be a good fit for you personally back a few weeks in the How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2024 episode. So definitely check that out if you're not sure which books you should be using or which course you should be taking or what your budget should be or what a realistic timeline is for your prep process. Okay, I go in extreme depth there, and I'm not going to rehash that here just in case you're a regular listener. There's 2 keys that are going to create a great performance on critical reasoning. And the very first is knowing the difference between each individual critical reasoning type. So you just heard me say I like to split it into 6 different categories. Other people have a different number. The important thing is that you understand how each of those categories is different from the other. So to give an example, there's a critical reasoning type called describe the role is what a lot of people call this, or some people call them bold-face questions because they're the only type of critical reasoning that has bold-face type in the argument. And that's going to be very different from another critical reasoning type that we'll call a strengthen the argument question. So a boldface and a strengthen are going to have 2 totally different approaches. There's going to be some overlap between the skills you need to be great at each one, but it's critically important that you understand how one is different from the other and how those 2 are different from the 3rd type and the 4th type and the 5th type. A good analogy here would be like volleyball and tennis are both sports. But if I try to apply the rules and the strategies that make me a good tennis player to the game of volleyball, I'm sure some of them probably will translate well, but all of them? Totally no. It's there are specific things that have to be implemented in a game of volleyball that just would be totally nonsense in a tennis match and vice versa. And that's exactly the same as these different critical reasoning types. So if you've been lumping critical reasoning all into one bucket and treating all critical reasoning questions the same, that is a missing piece for you that I would strongly recommend that you address, either with a set of books, a course, a one-on-one tutor, or whatever is going to be the best personal fit for you. And like I said, if you want my advice on how to make that decision well, then check out the How to Start episode from a few weeks back. Now, going a little bit further with this, once you learn the difference between each critical reasoning type, you must put in the repetitions so that you know them so well, you don't have to think about how they're different from one another on an actual test. So there's a type called assumption, for example. And when I see an assumption CR question on the GMAT, if I have to think, wait, what's my job on an assumption question again? I haven't studied it and learned it well enough. Okay, that's your barometer for yourself. You want to be able to look at a strengthened question on test day and just know what I do on strengthened questions. It should be like a reflex. I'm going to give you some tools for building that skill set up, but a lot of people just sort of learn the difference between each question type and then they believe that that's enough. And if you're struggling with critical reasoning and you have not developed the skill to the extent that I just described, that is holding you back. And that's a very, very simple fix. So how do you learn those things? I already talked about that. You take a class, get a set of books, etc. You find a reputable provider who's a good fit for you personally. Or there's free resources out there. I don't want to take away from any of the high quality free resources out there. I also have recommendations on free resources in that episode, okay? So once you know those, the first step is just a basic repetition. So you're going to go to the official guide for GMAT review, and I'll talk about why that's so important later. You go to the official guide for GMAT review, and you're going to find some boldface questions. You're going to find some assumption questions. You're going to find some strengthened questions, or you can use the internet to your advantage there. But make sure that you're practicing from official guide sources, not third-party sources. Once you have a few of those under your belt and you believe that you understand the mechanics of the strategy, then you have a couple different options for burning in the information to the level that I was describing. Number one is simple memorization techniques like flashcards or study sheets. Whatever you've used to memorize things in the past, just make a list of assumption, boldface, strengthen, weaken, and then test yourself as often as you need to on the individual strategy for each one of those question types until you just know it. You don't have to think about it at all when one of those questions shows up. So that's option one. And then option two is have a really robust review strategy, which is the second key to being great at critical reasoning questions and really is the answer to how do I improve my critical reasoning performance if I'm not performing at the level that I want to, okay? So let me dive into that and then I'll circle back to how that helps you learn. A lot of you have learned this the hard way already by just doing a ton of critical reasoning questions, completing a bunch of critical reasoning questions without a robust review process. And that was me. So if that's you, I feel for you because every year I meet thousands of students who have completed all the verbal questions in the official guide or taken several courses sometimes, worked with private tutors, and their verbal score hasn't gone up. Sometimes it's even gone down, if you can believe that. That happened to me back in the day. It was horrible. And sometimes you've made like some small gains, but it's not nearly commensurate with your effort and certainly not near your goal. And you're looking for more help. And that's why you're here right now. So if you haven't had a super hardcore, robust review process for critical reasoning, that also might be the thing that has been holding you back. The purpose of practicing is not completing practice problems. The purpose of practicing is to improve your skills. And so you want to be making meaningful gains from each individual question that you do. Completing questions is not efficient unless you have this review strategy. I'm going to give you a super simple can't fail strategy in a moment. I'll give you the preview version of it right now, but I'll go in depth with it for a second. I don't want to do the cliffhanger thing. So the main thing that you need is a clearly, objectively verifiable reason that the right answer is right, and a clearly, objectively verifiable reason that all the wrong answers are wrong. You need to understand that. You need to take the time to research the question if needed. You might need to web search it. You might need to look at the answer explanations in the book. But you need to come up with something that makes sense to you, and it should be related to the strategy that you learned for that specific question type. Okay, and I'll go in depth on this in a sec. But that's the basic element of a strong review process for critical reasoning. And when you have that and you're always tying it back to the specific strategy for that specific question type, like on boldface, I always tie my explanation for why the right answer is right and why the wrong answer is wrong to my specific strategy there. On strengthened questions, I always tie my explanation of why the right answer is right and why the wrong answers are wrong to my specific strategy there. And you can imagine over time that greatly reinforces the specific strategy for each individual question type. So if you combine that with the memorization techniques I was talking about, like flashcards or study sheets, and you do enough practice questions for you personally, I'm not going to give you a number because everybody's going to be different, but let's say you have this type of explanation I was just talking about for every question in the current version of the official guide. That's pretty darn good. You might need more work on that, but there's plenty more official problems out there if you do, but that's a good measure to start. You're going to be in fantastic shape with just knowing what the strategy is for each individual question type, okay? So that's CR in a nutshell and how you can improve CR quickly if you need to. Again, more on that in a sec. Let me dive into reading comprehension because I'm talking about the important differences, but there's also a lot of overlap when it comes to how you want to study these things. So reading comprehension is a totally different world from critical reasoning. It does not test logic. It tests just reading comprehension. And that might seem like super painfully obvious, but we do need to be careful about what we define here, or you might end up burning months of wasted study time. So a couple things. You can gauge the difficulty level of the reading comp you're looking at by how difficult it is for you to comprehend the passage you're looking at. This is an important tip. So if you're having a tough time reading the passage, you feel like, wow, this is complicated, this is difficult, I'm losing focus quite easily, then the questions that are associated with that passage will also be difficult. And the way the algorithm works is it's going to choose your reading comp questions, 3 for a short passage, meaning you don't have to scroll to see the whole thing on the screen, 4 for a long passage, meaning you have to scroll to see the entire text. It's going to choose those 3 or 4 questions at a pre-selected difficulty level, and then it will average your performance across the reading comp and then adapt accordingly. Again, if you're not sure how the adaptive nature of the exam works, check out the video on our website. So what does that mean? If you're a really slow reader or reading comp is a weakness for you, then you might want to consider giving away one question per passage, let's say, on reading comp. Now, that's not going to be a game-changing strategy if you're not good at reading comp and you're hoping you're going to just get an incredible score leap out of that. That's probably not going to happen, okay? But it can be helpful if you're starting as a very slow reader, which is a big pain point for a lot of people. If you're a fast reader or even an average speed reader, then I've got more game for you here on reading comp in a sec. But I'm specifically talking to the people who are really slow readers right now, because for you, that is the problem in verbal right now, is just your reading and comprehension speed is a big pain point, okay? So burning a question per passage is one way that you can get around that in the short term, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to work on your reading speed over the long term so that you eventually get fast enough that you could theoretically answer all the questions. That's going to be really valuable for moving you into the score range that you want if you're looking for a really elite score. Now, if you're not looking for an elite score and you just need another point or two and timing is a huge issue, then maybe what I just described to you can help you out. But it's not a go-to approach. And if you're thinking that the entire strategy I'm going to teach you here around reading comp revolves around not answering the questions, then you're off base. Okay. I'm just helping you out if you've struggled with speed, because speed can be a big cap on your score, even if you're amazing at critical reasoning. So you're going to want to plan to grind really hard on your reading speed if that's holding you back right now. If your reading speed needs help, then reading in English really helps. Reading speed is like a muscle. The more you read, the stronger that's going to get. The best time to start working on your reading speed is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. All right. So start small and scale up your reading time over time. So what I recommend is start with 10 or 15 minutes a day, whatever you can spare, and read anything in English, anything that you like if you're having a lot of trouble with this. You don't have to read super academic sources from the beginning, although that's good to scale up as your reading speed improves and your reading ability improves. If you have to start with grade 1 reading level stuff, start with grade 1 and scale up. Okay. Many people have gone before you. Yes, you're starting at a deficit. Is that fair? That's debatable. Does it change what you personally have to do to reach your goal? No. And that's what I recommend focusing on. Just put the blinders on. Don't worry about what other people need to do. Worry about what you need to do to get where you want to go with your score and your career. Okay. And there's no shame in having to start small with this stuff and scale it up over time. In fact, a lot of people are going to have more respect for you if you had to build up your reading speed just to get a great GMAT score, okay? So have some respect for yourself as well and acknowledge the challenge that you're up against and face that challenge head on. You can do it. So what I'd recommend is start with something that's an easy amount of reading for you to do, and then do that 3 days in a row, and then lift that by 20%. And then once you have that 3 days in a row, lift that by 20%. That could be a number of lines. It could be the speed it takes you to get through a passage. I would start, if you're starting for the beginning and you're really struggling with reading speed, with just 10 minutes and then 12 minutes and then 15 minutes and then 20 minutes. And then you just keep bumping that up after 3 consecutive days of hitting your 20-minute goal. And then 3 consecutive days of hitting your 24-minute goal. And then 3 consecutive days of hitting your 28 to 29-minute goal. Okay, you just keep boosting it 20% until you're reading 1 to 3 hours a day. It's probably a good amount if you really need work on this, okay? This is not a small investment of time and energy. The payout is absolutely massive. That's why I said run the numbers and get clear on why you're doing this before you go into it. Because for some of you, you're starting at a big deficit, and this is going to be a really big challenge, maybe the biggest academic challenge of your life so far. And I'm telling you right now, it is 1,000% worth it. It might not be fun. You might not like it. You might hate it, but it is worth it. Okay. Just letting you know. So the reason I lead off with that is, again, the question type tests reading comprehension. And if you can comprehend all the stuff, but you're way too slow, it's not going to matter how good your comprehension is. We need comprehension with efficiency enough to actually be able to get a look at the questions in the section. Otherwise, there's going to be a big penalty for not finishing this section, and our score is really going to suffer. All right. So if you've been running out of time on the verbal section, this should be the focus for you. All right. So I did want to lead off with that because it's such a big constraint for a lot of people. But if you're not struggling with that, or you're committed to the process of improving, then great, you're in good shape. So outside of just core reading speed and being able to read in English to comprehend the actual words on the page or on the screen, after that, there's 2 keys. Number 1, you're never being asked for your opinion or your personal point of view on a reading comprehension question. I'm going to say that again because this is the major mindset shift that most people I've worked with over the years needed to make. You are never, ever being asked for your opinion or your personal point of view on a reading comprehension passage. You're being asked, what did the passage say? That's why it's called reading comprehension. It's not called reading interpretation. That's really, really important because a lot of you have been struggling with reading comp because you're giving the test your opinion about what the author said instead of picking the answer that is what the author said. Okay? This can be very difficult to wrap your mind around because it really sounds like you're being asked for your opinion and your subjective point of view in a lot of reading comp questions. The way they phrase a lot of questions leads most people to believe, understandably, that the test is looking for them to interpret the text. So they ask for things like, what was the author's intention, or what can be inferred from the passage? I know that sounds like they're asking you for your opinion, but they're not. That can be very misleading, okay? Now, also think about all the language instruction you've had until this point in your life. Think about how boring your literature class would have been in high school or college if the teacher just said, hey, young sir or ma'am, what does it say in line 5 of the passage? And you just read it, and the teacher says, great job, you get an A for the day, okay? Imagine if that was 20 years of your literature instruction, right? It's just, what did the author say? So most of us have been conditioned to come up with our own interpretation or think about symbolism or allegory or read between the lines. This is an important skill in life and in business to read between the lines and to think critically. But that's not the skill that's being tested on reading comprehension, okay? And for many of you, the light bulb just went on listening to me talk about that, and you're excited to put this into play, which is fantastic. If you're just getting going with verbal and reading comprehension, then hopefully I've saved you a lot of time and just for free put tons and tons and tons of money in your pocket in the for future you and fulfillment in your heart and massive positive impact on the world, okay? This is my intention. So let's dig a little bit deeper with this because although it's a simple concept, a lot of people still have a lot of confusion around it, unfortunately. So what this means is that the answer must be based on what you read. It must be objectively verifiable. Like you should be able to take your reading comprehension answer choices to a court of law and say, Your Honor, right here is the evidence in the passage that proves this right answer right and proves why these other 4 answers are wrong, okay? And if you can't do that, then you need to review more using that mindset. Okay, the key to moving your GMAT verbal score fast is a robust review process. I know that for many of you, there is a voice in your head that just really believes that if you just did more practice questions, that would be the key. Listen, if you're getting results with the volume practice question approach, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not getting the results you want, and you believe I know what I'm talking about here, then just review more. Just do fewer questions with deeper review. It is the bulletproof, cannot fail approach, assuming you know how to read English and that you're not running out of time on question number 5. Okay, so with those caveats, that is the key. I really cannot emphasize this enough, and I apologize if I'm just going long on it, but you cannot imagine the number of conversations I have every year that go exactly the same way, which is I did every question and my score hasn't gone up. Why not? Okay, and this is always the answer. So this is a simple concept, what I'm talking about with reading comprehension, but it can be kind of a deep topic. I don't want you to overthink it. I want you to keep it simple. And I want you to know that once you master that concept, you've mastered reading comprehension. Everything else will come down to speed and your mindset so that you can handle the pressure of the overall exam. Okay, I don't want to take away from the anxiety piece that many of us are struggling with. That is a separate and important piece for many people to address. But in terms of the core skill, the core strategy, reading comprehension is not rocket science. If you have 16 different approaches for 16 different reading comp question types, and that's working for you, awesome. If you have 16 different approaches to 16 reading comp types and it's not working for you, then I want you to think that there is one type of reading comprehension question, the type where the answer is objectively verifiable by the passage. Okay, that's it. That's it. Now, the second key, as you might guess, to improving over time is a robust review process. So let's get into that a little deeper as promised. This applies to critical reasoning and reading comprehension and basically answers the question, how do I improve my verbal score? And many of you are confused about this. So let me clarify it. The number one key is practicing with official guide questions. GMAT invests a lot of money into each individual question, thousands of dollars. They have professional question writers who specialize in this. It's very expensive and it's extremely difficult for third-party providers to properly replicate this. Okay, so just the economics of the GMAT industry prevent virtually all third-party test prep providers from writing questions that are on the level of quality of what you'll find in the official guide. So let's just pick a number and say GMAC spends about $6,000 developing every single GMAT question, okay? There are 0 third-party providers in the marketplace who have the margin to make that work with a full suite of practice problems, all right? So it's not a knock against providers here. It's just a bit of an economic reality, if you will. And so you have access to those past GMAT questions via the official guide for GMAT review. It's available digital copy on MBA.com or available physical copy there or at many bookstores, okay? So if you don't have a copy of that book, and any edition from the last 20 years is totally fine, then that is essential that you get a copy of that book or find a way to access that information, okay? If you're relying on third-party questions only and you're getting the results you want, again, that's fine, but that can really slow you down, okay? If you're using only third-party provider questions, that can really slow you down. And I care about your success and your speed of preparation, and I don't want you to burn out and get discouraged. And so I strongly recommend that you use official guide questions, at least a handful as you're going through your course or content building phase of your preparation, and most certainly if you're in the practice test phase. So unfortunately, that means there aren't an overwhelming number of super high quality questions that you can use to practice because the official questions that are available are somewhat limited. And that's certainly true of hard level questions. So like there's twice as many easy and medium questions available out there as hard level questions. And if you're aiming for a super elite score, you're going to need to practice hard level questions to get exposure to the stuff you'll see on test day. And so that is even more reason to have a robust review process for each individual question you do, because you actually need to pull valuable takeaways from every reading comp and critical reasoning practice question you do. Because if you don't, you risk running out of question sources and capping your skills. And that's going to be a very frustrating situation to be in. Okay. So again, just really hammering what I think is going to help you most. I'm not going to bore you with the thousands of case studies and stories that I mentioned before of people burning through every official guide question and not seeing their verbal score move. If you really want to validate this, go on any GMAT forum and scroll down for 100 posts and count how many of them are people lamenting about their verbal score. Okay. And you'll see that it's not as straightforward as just doing a bunch of questions. All right. If you've taken a course or you've worked with a private tutor and you are not seeing results, then please reach out to us. We will definitely help you. We specialize in that situation, and it's very painful. I went through that situation, and we have developed a ton of custom stuff for you, a lot of which is free, and we will be glad to help you out if you're in that situation, okay? Now, let me give you a very simple review process that will work for you if you stay consistent with it. That is my caveat. You cannot expect that I'm going to wave a magic wand and give you a review process that if you do 5 times on 5 questions, you're magically going to get into Harvard Business School, even though you started with a 20 in GMAT verbal, okay? If I had that, I would wave that magic wand for you, every single one of you. This is the next best thing. For every verbal question, make sure you write down 2 things. Number 1, why the right answer is right. I touched on this a little bit before, but let me go a little further with it. It should be a compelling reason that you can systematize in the future. So think, if I see X, I will do Y. It should be a systematizable, repeatable thing that you can do on future questions to get those types of questions correct as well. Now, I already mentioned there's a specific strategy for each type of critical reasoning question. So something rooted in that is going to be the best bet. I already talked about that. For reading comp, as you might expect, your answer should be rooted in something the text told you. It should be something objectively verifiable in a court of law. You can point to it on the page. This is why the answer is A. If you need help with this, put it into a web search and learn from someone who does have a compelling reason. If you're having trouble coming up with a compelling reason, and use the explanations, the answer explanations in the official guide itself. They're actually good, decent for verbal. For quant, the official guide explanations are at best a 50% hit rate, and that's where using a web search can really help you out, okay? That's the first thing. You need to have a compelling explanation as to why the right answer is right, which is systematizable for future questions, okay? Number 2, You want to write down a compelling reason for why each wrong answer is wrong. Now, that doesn't need to be systematizable, but it's great if it is. Generally, something rooted in the logic and strategy for that specific type of critical reasoning question is going to be best. And then something rooted in the text of RC, or it is not addressed in the text at all. If it's not addressed in the text at all, it's not objectively provable based on the text. And so that might be the reason that many reading comp answers are wrong. Now, if you want help systematizing this stuff, that's where a reputable professional or reputable course of study can really help you out. So if you've been self-studying and you're struggling with that, and you want some recommendations for free, then by all means go to my How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2024 episode. I talked about that a couple times already, or reach out to us directly and we'll be happy to help. If you're taking a class or you have a personal coach and they've given you a great review method, then and that's working for you, awesome. My way is not the only way, but I've put a ton of thought and trial and error into this, into making it super simple and like a can't fail type of approach that works for general advice. This is a general advice format that I'm coming to you with. If you and I were talking one-on-one, I might have a different strategy for you or a more customized strategy. And the best approach will always be specifically tailored to your individual situation. But because this is a public generalizable format, I've given you something that is absolutely cannot fail if you do it consistently, like I said, okay? So it's a simple, actionable, universally effective method. And all it requires on your part is the discipline to execute it over and over and over and over again and not cut corners with your review. All right. If you need help building discipline, I actually did an episode specifically on that related to the GMAT a few weeks ago. If you're not capable of executing something repetitive over a long period of time, listen to that episode and put the advice into practice, and that will help tremendously, I promise. That's it. That is GMAT Verbal, everybody. Super special thanks to everyone who's rated and reviewed the podcast. Thank you so much. It really means a lot to us. All of us behind the scenes at TGS get a lot of energy from that. So if you're getting energy and value from this and you want to reciprocate that in a very simple way, then rating the show is a great way to do that. If you have feedback about the show, if you're not liking certain things or you want something to change, then let us know. We are more than happy to receive feedback. In fact, we even have a form at the link in bio on any of our social channels. Might be below this if you're watching on YouTube. And there you can fill out a little bit of information about your specific situation, programs you've taken, things you've engaged with, specific struggle areas you're dealing with, and what you want to see from future content from us. And we will take into account all of that stuff because we like to give information and advice that's relevant to you. There's a lot of advice we could share, but we only want to share the stuff that's actually going to help so that we're not wasting each other's time, okay? Now, if you need help with your personal verbal situation, you're struggling to make progress on your own, or again, you've failed with another provider, then we've got your back. You can talk to us live. If you want to book a call, just head to our website, register for the webinar, and then tell us a little bit more about your situation, and we'll be happy to talk to you live. If you prefer to DM, there's no obligation for any of this stuff. Just reach out to us on current social channels at the GMAT strategy, and we will give you as much as we possibly can for free. And if you want further help, you can ask us about that and we'll be happy to share. Okay. As always, my greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the GMAT, head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, and check out our free video presentation on how to achieve your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. In the meantime, this is a weekly show, so please subscribe and stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. Talk to you soon.